I want to look at a poem by T.S. Eliot, an early poem by him, Portrait of a Lady. Of course, the most famous portrait of a lady was by Henry James, and this poem by Eliot probably shares some things in common with that novel by Henry James. Both are about well-educated Americans who look to European culture, and there's a certain falsity about the kind of high society which the characters move in. So I'm not going to say anything more about Henry James. This is not about him, it's about T.S. Eliot. So this poem, Portrait of a Lady, was written when he was a young man in Harvard, and it's clearly about an early dalliance with an older lady, high society lady, and everything is done according to the mores of society, and we hear that they are becoming friends, which obviously means that the older lady is hoping for some kind of permanent relationship with the young man, who we are probably right to think of as Eliot himself, or at least largely Eliot himself. So that's the background. A young, fairly inexperienced man starts visiting an older lady who belongs to a certain cultural milieu in the New England of Eliot's time. She's high class. She knows about art. She's very cultured, and we have to read between the lines in order to understand that this is a budding relationship, actually, between a young man and an older lady. So it begins with quotation from the Jew of Malta: Thou hast committed fornication, but that was in another country, and besides, a wench is dead. So we need to ask if this gives any clue to the poem. Thou hast committed fornication. Well, it doesn't look like there was any kind of fornication here, but maybe in the impressionable poet's mind there was something going on. And it continues, but that was in another country, and besides, a wench is dead. Well, the young man gets out of this relationship by telling the older lady that he's going on a trip to Europe. So maybe that's the other country, and says besides the wench is dead. He also thinks about how he would feel if he heard that she was dead. She died while he was away. So yeah, maybe there is that element of escape. He's escaping this rather tired relationship, which never actually becomes a relationship. It's just a sort of faux friendship, which is hardly worth the word, maybe. At least on the man's side, he never seems to really open up to the lady at all. She, on the other hand, it seems, would have liked things to develop more than they did, but in a nutshell, if the young man is basically representative of T.S. Eliot, then we can say the young T.S. Eliot was a pretty cold fish, and he felt this deeply himself, and regretted the fact that he couldn't respond more to in a more spontaneous way to members of the opposite sex, especially as a young man. So let's read the first stanza. Let's take a look. So Among the smoke and fog of a December afternoon, you have the scene arrange itself as it will seem to do, with "I have saved this afternoon for you," and 4 wax candles in the darkened room, 4 rings of light upon the ceiling overhead, an atmosphere of Juliet's tomb, prepared for all the things to be said or left unsaid. We have been, let us say, to hear the latest Pole transmit the preludes through his hair and fingertips, so intimate this chap Chopin, that I think his soul should be resurrected only among friends, some 2 or 3 who will not touch the bloom that is rubbed and questioned in the concert room. And so the conversation slips among velleities and carefully caught regrets, through attenuated tones of violins mingled with remote cornets, and begins. You do not know how much they mean to me, my friends, and how rare and strange it is to find, in a life composed so much of odds and ends. For indeed I do not love it. You know, you are not blind. How keen you are to find a friend who has these qualities, who has and gives those qualities upon which friendship lives. How much it means that I say this to you. Without these friendships, life, what cauchemar! Among the windings of the violin and the ariettes of cracked cornets, inside my brain a dull tom-tom begins, absurdly hammering a prelude of its own, capricious monotone. That is at least one definite false note. Let us take the air in a tobacco trance, admire the monuments, discuss the late events, correct our watches by the public clocks, then sit for half an hour and drink our bocks. Well, that's an interesting first section to the poem. It sets a scene. It also kind of reminds us of certain later poems by T.S. Eliot and certain techniques which Eliot is going to use throughout his whole career. So, stanza is arranged in what we would call free verse, I suppose. Sometimes it's iambic pentameter, sometimes it moves into other meters. The lines are of varying length, and there are more than occasional rhymes, often full rhymes, which are there to emphasize a point or to point out an irony. And this is very typical of Eliot's style throughout his whole career. So the candles in the room at the beginning seems to give an atmosphere of Juliet's tomb, according to the writer or the speaker. So the idea of a romance is there, even if it's a dead romance. So if it's Juliet's tomb, then there must be some kind of variance of Romeo and Juliet, although the writer himself knows how absurd that is, but there is a romantic element to what they are, their relationship. So what do? They do cultural things together. They've been to hear the latest Pole transmit the preludes through his hair and fingertips, and the woman is very kind of arch. She's speaking in the language of her class, and in a way that she thinks perhaps will get through to the young man. So intimate is Chopin that I think his soul should be resurrected only among friends, some 2 or 3 who will not touch the bloom that is rubbed and questioned in the concert room. That, by the way, is rather similar to the preludes with the yellow smoke and the cat. And so the conversation slips among velleities and carefully caught regrets, through attenuated tones of violins mingled with remote cornets and begins. So it's rather like proof rock, isn't it? It sounds similar, different sections, which sections of monologue, of conversation, even if it's conversation with self, and other parts which set up the monologue or set up the conversations. Then we get into the conversation. You do not know how much they mean to me, my friends, and how rare and strange it is to find, in a life composed so much of odds and ends, for indeed I do not love it. You knew you are not blind, how keen you are. So this is her style. It's very repetitive, kind of verbose style, as we would think now, but at the time it was probably considered very educated, and she's probing and seeing what the young man thinks. So her friends are very important to her, and it's how rare and strange, and she thinks it's rare and strange to find a real friend, which is, I guess, what she thinks and hopes a young man is going to be, in a life composed so much of odds and ends. There's a certain falsity about it, isn't there? She's very carefully considering the way that she speaks and what she says here. She's trying to probe the young man and see what his feelings for her are. If he responds, it seems that the young man doesn't respond much at all. He just really internalizes what she's saying, and perhaps speaks, just communicates inwardly with himself. Inside my brain's dull tom-tom begins absurdly hammering a prelude of its own, capricious monotone. That is at least one definite false note. Let us take the air in a tobacco trance, admire the monuments, discuss the late events, correct our watches by the public clocks, and sit for half an hour and drink our box. So, yeah, she's probing, seeing if her feelings for the young man are in any way reciprocated. They don't seem to be, but he is also cold-fish, very quiet, not giving anything away. So she's probably left in a state of uncertainty. She doesn't know how this smart, handsome young man feels about her. 2. Now that lilacs are in bloom, she has a bowl of lilacs in her room. I feel that here the very full rhyme is for irony. So she does everything according to the season, according to what people would expect of her. She wants to impress people the whole time, and that's what the very full rhyme gives. That's the idea it conveys. Now that lilacs are in bloom, she has a bowl of lilacs in her room. She wouldn't have anything else, because she's so conventional, does everything that's expected of her, and twists one in her fingers while she talks. Ah, my friend, you do not know what life is, you who hold it in your hands, slowly twisting the lilac stalks. You let it flow from you, you let it flow, and youth is cruel and has no remorse, and smiles at situations which it cannot see. I smile, of course, and go on drinking tea. So again, she's trying to get some kind of response from the young man, but she's not having much luck at that. All he does is smile and go on drinking tea. So, so she says, you because you're young, you do not know what life is, even though you are holding it in your hands. And those who are young have no remorse. So she knows that he can just forget her in an instant. If she shows any real desire for him, he will probably run away. And She says youth smiles at situations which it cannot see, so it's not really bothered about the future either. I smile, of course, and go on drinking tea, so he's not very communicative, is he? He's just, he's not only a cold fish, he's also calculating. He knows what she wants, he knows what she's thinking, she knows what she wants to do. He is thinking about whether perhaps it will advantage him in any way at all, or if he can get something out of it himself. He doesn't seem to have any real feeling for the lady. I smile, of course, and go on drinking tea. Yet with these April sunsets I somehow recall my buried life in Paris in the spring. I feel immeasurably at peace and find the world to be wonderful and youthful after all. This is obviously the woman continuing in her very verbose way about life. And then we go back to the inner workings of the man's mind. So he's listening to the woman, but he's also aware of the whole ambience around her. The voice returns like the insistent out of tune of a broken violin on an August afternoon. Reminds me of the walls of Magnus Martyr, where the walls of Magnus Martyr hold inexplicable splendour of Ionian white and gold, although those lines are better and more, of course, in a less have a less trivial context, perhaps, although this is not necessarily trivial, but love is not trivial, but this particular relationship seems to be fairly trivial, and nobody's going to have too badly a broken heart when it goes wrong. I am always sure that you understand my feelings, always sure that you feel sure that across the gulf you reach your hand. But is she sure really? She's just being rhetorical. This is what she hopes, and she's hoping for a response from the man, a nod, an affirmatory comment. But as usual, she's just getting the echo of her own voice, and the man goes on drinking tea and smiling and making polite noises, but never committing himself or giving his real ideas away. You are invulnerable. You have no Achilles heel. You will go on, and when you have prevailed, you will say, at this point, many a one has failed. So she continues talking about youth and how it's bold and brash and has no remorse, doesn't think about older women or the pain older women may feel if they have been affected emotionally by a young man, and it's all very rhetorical and all looking for a response and all trying to see if the speaker is going to give anything away, basically. But of course he doesn't, being the model of Eliot himself, I assume. But what have I, my friend, to give you? What can you receive from me? Only the friendship and the sympathy of one about to reach her journey's end. Well, we don't know exactly how old she is, but seems to be suggesting that she's nearing her death, so perhaps she's really late middle age. Maybe this young man is about 20, so there is a very wide age gulf between them. She says, I shall sit here serving tea to friends, so the tea motif returns. I take my hat. How can I make cowardly amends for what she has said to me? You will see me any morning in the park, reading the comics and the sporting page. Particularly, I remark, an English countess goes upon the stage. A Greek was murdered at a Polish dance. Another bank defaulter has confessed. I keep my countenance. I remain self-possessed. Except when a street piano, mechanical and tired, reiterate some worn-out common song with the smell of hyacinths across the garden, recalling things that other people have desired. Are these ideas right or wrong? Um, so looks like maybe while she's talking, he's looking at the paper, and then he starts telling her about the stories in the paper as a way of avoiding any kind of emotional commitment or getting involved in an emotional conversation with her at all. He's just sidestepping all her attempts to get him involved and to say something significant about how he feels about her. So he's able to do that without any problems, he says, except when a street piano, mechanical and tired, reiterates some worn-out common song with the smell of hyacinths across the garden, recalling things that other people have desired. Are these ideas right or wrong? So he's also confused. He doesn't really want to get involved with this older woman, but he's confused by love. He's a young man. He has hopes for the future, and these melodies from the mechanical piano bring out his own sentimental side, I guess, even though he wants to have nothing to do with the woman, really, although he's happy to see her and use her for some purpose. Then we come to number 3, section 3. The October night comes down, returning as before, except for a slight sensation of being ill at ease. I mount the stairs and turn the handle of the door, and feel as if I had mounted on my hands and knees. These very long, irregular lines, often rhyming, typical of Prufrock and the Wasteland. And I guess he's learning his craft here. It's a very evocative image. He's climbing up the stairs to see her for the last time, I think, and before going away. And he's ill at ease, and he climbs the stairs and turns the handle of the door and feels as if he'd mounted on his hands and knees. So totally, he may look self-possessed, but inside he's totally frayed. His nerves are totally frayed. He feels like he's mounted on his hands and knees. He knows he's got something to deliver, which will be difficult to say and difficult for the lady to take. And it's a prelude to the end of the affair, we can say. If it ever was an affair, I don't think it was, but it's the end of the friendship, the end of the possibility, the end of the potential to become something. And then straight into the voice of the woman, and so you are going abroad, and when do you return? But that's a useless question. You hardly know when you are coming back. You'll find so much to learn. My smile falls heavily among the bric-a-brac. So, yeah, she's excellent at small talk, although she's really very disappointed, presumably that the young man is going away. She had hopes in him. She's still able to trot out all this small talk about you will learn a lot, and when are you coming back, or you don't really know when you're coming back. And the man, fortunately for him, doesn't really need to say a lot. My smile falls heavily among the bric-a-brac. Seems like he's never saying a lot. Always it's a woman talking, and the man is thinking and imagining things, but never really connecting with what the lady has to say. She just grasps at one last straw. Perhaps you can write to me. My self-possession flares up for a second. This is as I had reckoned. So I'm not sure what that means exactly. Perhaps the most obvious answer is that he feels pleased that she wants to stay in contact with him, not probably because he likes her a lot, but because he, as a young man, he doesn't have much confidence, and he feels pleased with himself that he's had an effect on her and she wants to stay in contact with him. It's like an ego thing, but it's immediately tempered. I have been wondering frequently of late, but our beginnings never know how it ends, why we have not developed into friends. I feel like one who smiles and turning shall remark. Suddenly, his expression in a glass, my self-possession gutters, we are really in the dark. So it's like an accusation from the woman, why didn't we become friends? And now he goes back to his insecurities, it's like he couldn't really impress her too much because she says we didn't develop into friends. So before, when she mentioned staying in touch by letter, he seemed to think that perhaps he'd had this tremendous effect on her and she was in love with him and she had to hang on, and he could sort of string her along and she'd be writing him letters, and he'd say, "Oh, there's this woman at home who is really in love with me, although I don't think much of her myself. She has no real effect on me." But it's not like that at all, really, because she says directly, I've been asking myself of late why we didn't develop into friends. So they're not even friends. There's a little bit of coldness coming through from the lady at this point, and as a young man, the writer's sensibility can easily take a knock, and it takes a knock here. His ego takes a knock. She's not obsessed with him at all. It seems she doesn't even think that they developed into friends. So, his ego suffers from that. My self-possession gutters. We are really in the dark. And then the woman again, for everybody said so. All our friends, they all were sure our feelings would relate so closely. I myself can hardly understand. We must leave it now to fate. You will write at any rate. Perhaps it is not too late. I shall sit here serving tea to friends. So the banality of the situation, the absurdity of it, the lack of any real content is reflected in the very full basic rhymes at the end of these three lines. We must leave it now to fate. You will write at any rate. Perhaps it is not too late. A certain absurdity, a certain lack of any real content is it's all just fluff on the surface. There's nothing beneath. And she'll just continue in the same way, probably find another young man that she can talk to instead of this one. I shall sit here serving tea to friends. And then back to not to what the young man says, but to what he says and feels, to himself. And I must borrow every changing shape, to find expression, dance like a dancing bear, cry like a parrot, chatter like an ape. Let us take the air in a tobacco trance. Yeah, so he feels like someone who has many personas. He's doing this, he's this person, he's trying to be that person, he's trying to be the romantic young man in the presence of the woman, and then he's something else when he goes home, and when he goes abroad he'll be something else again. So he doesn't really know who he is. He's a young man, and he's crying like a parrot, and he's chattering like an ape. He's just a persona going through the motions. A young man who doesn't really know how he feels at all. At least the woman is pretty sure about her feelings and what she wants. The young man just keeps quiet all the time and probably doesn't even know what he wants or even who he is. He's just like an actor. He's just going through the motions. Um, well, and what if she should die some afternoon? Afternoon grey and smoky, evening yellow and rose, should die and leave me, sitting pen in hand, with the smoke coming down above the rooftops, doubtful for quite a while, not knowing what to feel or if I understand, or whether wise or foolish, rarely or too soon, tardy or too soon. Would she not have the advantage after all? This music is successful with a dying fall. Now that we talk of dying, and should I have the right to smile? Yeah, so finally he has this meditation on what would happen if she actually died while he was away. How would he feel about that? Would he still feel that somehow he got some sort of cheap advantage from her, or by dying would she have blown away all the sort of absurdity of his youthful ego and his concerns? So maybe he is recognizing that she might be more mature than he is at this point. So what if she died and left him sitting pen in hand with the smoke coming down over the rooftops? Would he have the right to smile? It would kind of destroy his story about leaving a broken heart behind him, and he would know the absurdity of that and uh, how he really tried to string the woman along and make her like him a lot, uh, for the benefit of his own ego. But if she died, wouldn't that make all of these attempts on his part to seem cool and a Lothario absurd? The stark reality of the situation would then be seen. He is just an inexperienced and rather silly young man, uh, stringing along an older woman who is seeking for friendship, and it's a rather callous thing to do, and her death would bring that home. So if she did die, he certainly wouldn't have any right to smile. Well, it's an interesting poem. As I say, it really looks forward to a lot of techniques that Eliot is going to use throughout his career, especially the free verse, the irregular lines, the irregular meters, the rhyming, to on the basis of emphasis and irony, to point something out that's important. Many of the lines sound reminiscent of later poems, um, like Wasteland, as I already pointed out, and the preludes with the uh, the smoke from the chimney, I think, coming curling around the building and seeming like a cat. All this is kind of foreshadowed in this poem, and there are some great lines, lines which stand alone and which don't we don't need to refer to later poems to see value in, like he turns the handle of the door and mounts upon, what is it that's he feels as if he'd mounted on his hands and knees. I feel as if I think that's a great line, actually, to convey fear. That's what the young man is feeling, fear. So he feels when he goes up the stairs to see the woman for the last time, to tell her that he's going to Europe, leaving. He won't see her again. he's feeling real fear, and that's conveyed by this line. I feel like I'd mounted on my hands and knees. Um, Great line, and great irony in lines like, now that lilacs are in bloom, she has a bowl of lilacs in her room. Kind of sardonic, ironic point of view. Someone who's very sharp, and seeing the absurdity in the older woman's situation, although he can't see his own uh, nastiness, we can say. Um, Although, yeah, that's not entirely true. He knows that he has to dance like a dancing bear, cry like a parrot, chatter like an ape. So he is perhaps deep down aware of his own inexperience and feels the fear that comes from that, but he's not going to tell anybody. And he's quite happy to string the woman along. So I would suggest that this is a fine poem from Eliot, an early poem, but looking forward to later poems, and also including techniques and ways of writing that would remain important for the rest of his life. So hope that was useful, and if it was, then consider subscribing and hitting the like button. Thanks a lot.